Imagine transforming a modest teacher's salary into a pathway to financial independence, achieving the impossible in less than a decade, and eventually working fewer hours per week than most people spend in a single meeting. Today's guest proves that you don't need a six-figure salary in order to break free from the traditional work grind, but you do need to sacrifice and put in the work in order to compensate for that. Hello, and welcome to the BiggerPockets Money Podcast. My name is Mindy Jensen, and with me as always is my love of learning co-host, Scott Trench.
Thanks, Mindy. Great to be here and excited to put another great show on the books. BiggerPockets has a goal of creating 1 million millionaires. You're in the right place if you want to get your financial house in order, because we truly believe financial freedom is attainable for everyone, no matter when or where you're starting. And today we are going to discuss another situation from a teacher's perspective. Bryce, welcome back to a BiggerPockets podcast. You were back last on the BiggerPockets Real Estate podcast a few years ago. We're excited now to welcome you onto the BiggerPockets Money podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm a big fan of both of you guys. I've been listening to you a lot on my Peloton treadmill.
Oh, fantastic. I have a Peloton as well, and my username is @BiggerPedals. So you can follow me there.
Bryce, let's jump into your investing story. When did you first start investing in real estate, investing in the stock market, however you first started?
So in 2006, my wife and I purchased our first property. It was right when we first got married. We bought a luxury condominium, a one-bedroom luxury condominium in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. That's where she's from. That's where I moved as soon as we got married. And that was the first place that we bought. Again, luxury condo. We had a connection through some family to the developer who was creating these condos. They were in a retrofitted Bethlehem steel building. It was actually a really neat project, but we bought in 2006. And my thinking was, in 2 years, I'll be able to sell and reap a nice profit, tax-free profit, because we'll have been in for our 2 years, and then we can take our profits and go elsewhere as our family grows or as our living situation changes. Of course, that sounds a lot sillier looking backwards than it did when I thought it in 2006.
I'm right there with you. I bought a beautiful house on a lake. Well, I bought a crappy house on a lake that I was going to make into a big, beautiful house in October of 2006. And yes, I was also going to move in 2 years and reap the rewards. That did not happen either.
So fast forward 2008, we were pregnant with my oldest daughter. And of course, by 2008, the sky was falling, especially in the condo market. And we found that a condo that we owed $152,000 on, similar units were selling for like $90,000 to $95,000. So we were completely underwater. And I was a school teacher, a sixth grade public school teacher. My wife worked for a nonprofit. And we realized we couldn't sell it because we didn't have money to make up the difference in the note. And we also, this was the first time we did the math on what it was costing us to hold the condo every month. We realized we couldn't even rent it out for what it was costing us to own it. We were going to be about $300 short, even with the top level rent. And to give you the exact numbers, it cost us about $1,400 a month to carry the condo. And like top rents at that time were like $1,100 a month.
And remind me, if we zoom out, what was your income and expenses like personally on at this point in time?
We're talking 2006 numbers. I was probably at $43,000 to $44,000 in salary. My wife was very similar, maybe low 40s in her compensation. So two nonprofit salaries, not making a ton of money. It seemed fine at first because it was all fun and games when it was two people with two mouths to feed and on two salaries. And we just looked at the condo fees and everything else as just sort of bills that we had to pay every month. We didn't really think of it as like carrying costs that were a part of the asset consideration as a whole.
All right, would you say that is a low cost of living, medium cost of living, or high cost of living area?
I would say low to medium. It's gotten more difficult, or the cost of living has gotten higher. Bethlehem is in what's called the Lehigh Valley. So it's Allentown, Bethlehem, and Easton. It's the third largest MSA in the state of Pennsylvania, behind Greater Philly and Greater Pittsburgh. It's about an hour and change west of New York City and maybe an hour north of Philly. There's a robust local economy. It's seen a lot of growth in the last decade and a half, and it's a good area. It had low cost of living. It's like everywhere. It has gone up in the last number of years. And I want to pause here, though, because your listeners are hearing this, and I just want to step into their world for a second. I want to admit something about being a podcast listener. I hear people's stories on your podcast, on other podcasts too. And it's always like, it's one of two things for me. Either it's this rags to riches story, and somehow they start investing in real estate and everything goes great for them. And I have to be honest, when I hear that, like, I think, well, if that was me, I wouldn't be able to go through what they went through. And I sort of immediately begin to detach from being able to identify with that podcast guest, because I'm like, well, that would wreck me. I wouldn't be able to do it. The other kind of podcast guest is somebody who it just seems like they've always been absolutely killing it. And then they're going to tell me what they've done, and I hear their story, and I'm like, I just don't think I'm as high functioning as that person is. I just want to condition my story with that and say, if you're listening to Scott and Mindy right now, I'm going to try to give this account in a way that it's stuff everybody can do or maybe can identify with. Or if it's not, if it was a lucky break or something like that, I'm going to call it out and say, this part was lucky. This part is maybe not duplicatable for everybody listening right now. And this is maybe different than it used to be, just so that when you walk away, you can have some actionable content, advice, whatever.
I think that's really good feedback. And I think that one of the observations I'd had, let's stick on this topic for a second, because I think it's really important, and probably, like you said, listeners will be really interested in this. But I think one of the issues that we find in a lot of FI journeys is that very few FI journeys start with somebody earning a less than median income, maintaining that for the duration of their FI journey, and then producing an outcome that the average listener wants, right? Like the average listener for BiggerPockets Money wants an outcome of $1 to $2.5 million at some point that is meaningfully earlier than their retirement at 65. And you're just not going to find a story of someone who had no advantages whatsoever in there with a very ordinary circumstance who maintained the entire thing without an extraordinary savings rate. So the folks that you hear on the second part of your story there have something that happened to them, right? Usually it's the income goes up, right? Like the income goes up from $50,000 to $200,000 over the course of a 10, 15-year career, for example. Or there's a couple of real estate plays, or there's some lucky breaks, or there's an inheritance. Although those are rare, those folks tend to not want to share that story. Even that's a very common way to add wealth that comes in someone's 30s, 40s, or 50s. And then the other side of it is, like you said, there's these true rags to riches stories out there that are incredibly inspiring in some ways, but also I can see why they could be demotivating in some cases. But the average story is much more like, I started in this position and I had a few advantages that I used to parlay towards my financial journey. And I think that's what we're going to hear today. The difference being that as a teacher, you likely didn't see your ordinary income skyrocket over that time period.
To your point, if you're a teacher and you plan to remain a teacher for the entirety of your career, there's no such thing as a really good financial year as a teacher. There's no huge client that you landed. There's no gigantic commissions. There's basically no merit pay. If that's your financial plan, there's nothing wrong with being a teacher. We need teachers. But if that's the financial plan, you're not playing in a ballpark where home runs can be hit. So that's the first thing I would throw out there is analyze your current scenario. You may need to change lanes, or figure out how you can parlay something that you're doing into something that touches large numbers, because that's going to be your shot.
So when did you first discover the concept of financial independence and start pursuing it?
Yeah, I'll give you the first sort of inkling that I had, and that was this. I was 23 years old. I had finished college with a teaching degree, and I was back home living with my parents. This was in Westchester, Pennsylvania, which is just outside of Philadelphia. I was renting my high school bedroom for my dad, because I had a college degree and that's the kind of guy my dad is. So I was paying $300 a month for both my parents, living with both my folks and working this job. And I worked with another 23-year-old who, when he asked me where I lived, I said, I live in my high school bedroom still. I was embarrassed to say it. I asked him, where do you live? And he said, well, my college roommate and I bought a 4-unit apartment building in Norristown, Pennsylvania, which is just outside of Philly. And he said, we room together in one of those apartments and we rent out the other 3 rooms. Okay, so up until age 23, I'd gotten really good grades. I was pretty smart. I graduated with a reasonable degree, magna cum laude from a good school. And I'm being honest with you guys, I did not understand that you could make money from something besides your job until I was talking to this kid. I had seen infomercials on TV late at night. I always just thought that those were bunk or that those were snake oil. But this was a real live person sitting in front of me telling me something that they did that was making them money. And so it was undeniable. I couldn't say like, well, that's just hokum. It dislodged my brain because I thought at the time, well, my 19-year-old self chose elementary education as my college major. I'm stuck, like my financial future is etched in granite, never to be altered. And so that's where I was. I was like, if I had wanted to make a lot of money, I should have majored pre-med or pre-law or something like that. But here was this guy who I was working with who did that. And I didn't understand individual people could own apartment buildings. I knew that Jerry Seinfeld lived in an apartment on television and Joey and Chandler lived in an apartment. But normal people, I didn't think they owned it. So that was the first, my brain cracked open and I realized this guy's making money from the job we're both working and he's making money from having invested in this quad.
And what year was that conversation?
That was 2002 or 2003. So this was before I got married. Yeah, it was right when I came out.
And so 4 years go by before you buy the rental.
Yeah, because it turns out people don't just walk up to you and offer you a 4-unit apartment building. It's not how it works. You don't realize it and then it happens for you. You actually have to do a little digging. Okay, that was the first, let's call it the first mental domino was this is something that can be done. This guy is doing it. And I was smart enough that I asked him, I'm like, well, wait, isn't there a really large mortgage for something like that? And he's like, yeah, I mean, we pay the mortgage with the rents from the other 3 units. It's not cheap, but we cover it with that. I'm like, well, what about real estate taxes, homeowners insurance, the electric bill? He's like, dude, we pay all that stuff with the rents from the other 3 units. And I remember I was like, wait a minute. So you're just living there for free? What do you do with the money that you're making from this job? He's like, stock market, baby. And I was hooked. I cornered that poor guy in the lunchroom and asked him to tell me who told you that you could do this and who explained it to you? And the rest is like every real estate investor. He brought in the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. He gave it to me. I devoured it in a day and a half. I at least understood the concept from a 30,000 foot view of owning assets that fund your lifestyle. That book's not very granular. It's just sort of a good, maybe what's possible kind of thing. But it was a good brain opener for me to start realizing, wait, I might want something like this. To continue the story, if you want the total bio, I dinked around for a few years. I got married at age 26. That's when my wife and I moved to Bethlehem, so 2006. That's when we bought that condo. That's when we were underwater on it by 2008. And then 2008, we find out that we're pregnant. And it felt like a 1-bedroom condo was really not going to work anymore. And then we had this problem. Okay, we're underwater. We can't sell it. And if we try to rent it out, we're going to be losing $300 a month. So that was a rock and a hard place. And we were stuck there, at least in 2008.
So how long did that continue? How long were you stuck with this property?
We elected to become landlords to lose the $300 from owning the place. That was really the only option available to us. We mitigated that slightly by moving into a cheaper apartment that we rented out. So we were simultaneously tenants and landlords. And then that apartment, we found a decent one for $850. And so it did lower in relative terms, our cost of housing, because we were going from the luxury condo down to this 3rd floor walk-up apartment. That kind of offset some of the losses that we had with losing money on the condo. And then I just figured we were fried. Here's the rest of the story. When my daughter was born, she's 4 months old, 3rd floor walk-up apartment. I come home from school, from teaching one day. I walk into the apartment. My wife is bawling her eyes out in the middle of the floor. And my 4-month-old daughter is crying in the crib. And I ask her, what's the matter? She says, I'm pregnant again. When my wife was 4 months pregnant, we got pregnant with my second daughter. And we were in a 2-bedroom apartment. I was like, okay, now we're just officially fried. We can't make it work in this apartment with 2 kids. I still can't sell the place. I'm losing money. This has gone from bad to worse. A few weeks later, I'm playing in my head the conversation I had with that guy when I was 23. Okay, so it was percolating for a while. And I'm parking at a stoplight, and I see across the street from me a for sale sign, and then it's on a row home in Bethlehem. And I see that there's 2 electric meters on the side of the building and 2 mailboxes on the front porch. And in my head, I'm like, I bet that means it's a duplex. On the way back from work, I called the number on the sign. The agent showed it to us. It smelled like cat piss and cigarettes and was not good. But we got on an auto email with that real estate agent, and she started sending us all of the computer started sending us all the multifamily listings that came up in Bethlehem. Eventually, we found one that was just gorgeous, another duplex. It had a 3-bedroom apartment on the second and third floor combined, and then it had a 1-bedroom apartment on the first floor. And so to give you the numbers, this was the comparison. This is where it kind of all started, the gears started turning for me. It was going to cost about $1,200 to buy this duplex. That's PITI, so principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. And the apartment on the first floor was renting for $600 per month. So just my quick back of the napkin math was, okay, if we buy this place and it costs $1,200 a month and the tenant's giving us $600 a month, our kick-in only needs to be $600 a month. And since we were renting for $850, that seemed like a discount to me in terms of how much to budget for our own housing. So that's what we did. We bought the place. We started kicking in $600. A year later, we turned tenants around. And we were renting it for $750 on the first floor. We refinanced out of an FHA loan 15 months later and got the payment to $1,100 and had tenants in for like $850, $900. And so we were living there for $200 a month. Had our third daughter while we were living in that 3-bedroom apartment, and it felt like, okay, I'm onto something here.
What year is this that we're at the story? You emerge with a successful house hack refinanced, and it seems like that's the turning point where now the tide begins to turn and you can really begin to accelerate the accumulation.
I still did not know my butt from my elbow in terms of investing. I just knew the simple back of the napkin math of we're only paying $200 a month towards our housing. So this was 2009. We bought that place, moved my daughter into it. Had my second daughter in 2009, had my third daughter in 2011 while we were still living there. And things were great. It's a gorgeous apartment. It's actually still like my flagship apartment. We don't live in it any longer, but I still own the place. I still have tenants there. And yeah, I thought this is awesome. I've executed, like you said, I've executed what I read about in this book. And I've, in a miniature way, done what this guy did, who I met when I was 23. So that was step 1. Step 2 was the place next door to us was a 3-unit. Exact same outer shell of the building, like same superstructure, but it was just divided that there was an apartment on each floor. The tenants who were living there were just bananas crazy. They were dealing drugs. They were screaming at all hours of the night.
This is the next property. You're purchasing it in what year? And can we put together, is this a rental investment or one that you're going to move into?
The property next door to us, while we lived there, the tenants were crazy. So our neighbors were nuts. I approached the owner of that 3-unit and said, would you consider selling me this building? At the time, I figured it's a good way to protect the investment we've already made in this duplex by maybe controlling who the tenants were next door.
That's nuts. You didn't like your neighbors, so you bought the house.
The important part, though, is that we needed to move into it because the only way I could underwrite going into that deal was to get owner-occupant financing again. I know you guys have said this before on your podcast, and I know it's probably common knowledge for a lot of real estate investors, but for a newer listener, I think the best investment deal out there, I mean, like maybe the best investment deal in history, is when you can use an owner-occupant mortgage to buy a multifamily building. So a duplex, a triplex, or a quad, because you can get access to the sort of sweetheart financing that comes with owner-occupant purchase, but you're buying something that will eventually be an investment grade asset. So I'm a big fan of doing that. And we did it initially with an FHA loan.
I want to jump in here and just clarify for anybody listening, Bryce moved into this property as an owner occupant. He didn't just say he was going to do it. He actually did it. If you don't intend to move into the property, that's mortgage fraud. That's a felony punishable by up to 30 years in prison, which is 30 years more than I want to spend in prison. So You are absolutely right. It is totally legal to buy a property with an owner-occupied mortgage, live in it for 12 months, which is what your loan says you have to do, and then you can move out and rent the entire property out. That's legal. What's not legal is buying it, saying you're going to live there, and then just saying, well, I'm just lying to the bank. What's the harm in it? Well, it's a felony.
Yeah, that's not the kind of living for free that we want to emphasize here at BiggerPockets Money.
I was always highly conscious of that I wanted to do it the right way. I didn't want to be looking over my shoulder. So we, in fact, moved into that 3-unit, into a worse and smaller apartment in that 3-unit with 3 kids. And I spent the next year fixing up the other 2 apartments, making them nice. I mean, I was teaching. I was getting up at 6 a.m. I was going in, prepping for the day, teaching, coaching cross country, coming home at 5, doing dinner with my 3 daughters, putting them to bed at 8. And then from 8 until 1 in the morning, I was going up and working on the other 2 units in this triplex to try to make them ready to rent out for a whole year. And I told my wife, look, give me a year of this and I promise we'll buy like a normal house. We won't be doing this forever. This is just to get us set up. And that's what we did. We, to give you numbers on it, really, when we walked away from those 2 places, now this was with the interest rates of like 3% or 3.5%. The second one we bought in 2012. So again, we had moved in 2009. 3 years later, we buy the place next door, 2012. We renovated the unit that we moved into. Then we moved into it. And then I renovated the other 2 units. But the place we had been living in was cash flowing about $1,200 a month to us when we moved into the triplex. So the duplex is throwing off $1,200. It's paying the mortgage, the principal and interest, taxes and insurance, or pretty close to it, for the triplex. So we're kind of living there for free. And then as I fixed up the 2nd floor and 3rd floor and rented those apartments out for $1,000 each, now all of a sudden we're living in place for free and making $2,000 from those 2 apartments. And that was, I think, I would argue, that's when I really reached the level of what that guy was at, who I met when I was 23, because we were living for free and making some extra money on top of it as well. The problem is we were living with 3 kids in a 2-bedroom apartment.
In the bottom unit, right?
In the bottom unit, correct.
I believe that this is one of the moves you must make to a certain degree. You could have alternatively, in a different reality, done this with a live-in flip and had potentially a similar outcome in it with different lumps in terms of cash flow or profits. And there it wouldn't have been a steady stream, but it might have been a similar profit level with it. But I believe that for someone in that circumstance, as a teacher with 3 kids in there, you must do something like this, or there must be a crazy side hustle if you want to pursue financial independence. And very few people will do it out there. And I think that it's a requirement in order to get on the other side of it. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with it. I want to be very realistic. There was a mix of 2 things. One, I hustled. Okay, I just told you guys that. I'm coming home. I'm staying up late. I'm doing renovations. I'm seeking out a landlord and trying to buy stuff off market. So there's an element of hustle. Okay, I deserve credit for my hustle. But there's an aspect of it too that was just fortuitous. 1, interest rates were low. 2, I miscalculated how much money it was going to take to renovate that 3-unit. And we ended up needing to borrow money privately from a family member who had a home equity line of credit. They allowed us to just borrow, like they gave us the money and we paid them the floating cost of their home equity line of credit to finish this triplex. And then as soon as it was completed, I went and got another owner occupant mortgage. We essentially burred out of it and I paid back their private money. So it'd be very easy for somebody who doesn't have access to a family member with a home equity line of credit and a willingness to bet on you to say something like, must be nice, dude. You had access to, whatever it was, 30, 40 grand. Not everybody is so lucky. And I freely admit that's true. Not everybody is so lucky. But it took a combination of, 1, asking for that, understanding how kind of the liquidity of it works, understanding post-renovation appraisal, being able to give reasonable assurances to that family member, like we're going to be able to reimburse you as soon as we get this place reappraised because it's going to really go up in value.
I'm sure also that I'm living with my wife and 3 kids in the basement unit of a triplex to save money. I could lose, but is there a more hustle I can demonstrate in my life potential family member lender.
And it's true. Like, let's say I had failed. Guess what? I'm on the hook for reimbursing that money. It wasn't a gift. It was a loan that we had a signed agreement for. I needed to pay back. So I had to make good for it by creating value in that triplex commensurate with what I was going to refinance back out. So I want to throw that at your audience and have it and just say, I understand some of it was luck, but a lot of it was pluck.
Yeah, no, I want to say in 2012, interest rates were lower than they are now. But you know what? They were lower for everybody. It's not just Bryce that got a lower interest rate and everybody else was paying 7%. Yes, interest rates were lower. It was much easier to cash flow on a property then. I just interviewed a guy who's buying properties in Wisconsin right now. They're good properties. They still cash flow like crazy. And people are saying, oh, well, I can't buy real estate because it doesn't cash flow anymore. You can still find cash flowing properties right now. Hey, Scott, do you know of anybody in this phone call who recently bought a property that is cash flowing?
I will say that if I were to leverage it 95% with an owner occupant mortgage and move in, I don't know. So I don't think it would have worked in that particular context. I have talked to the kids today who are doing the house hack, who are doing the first house hack, and the strategy that seems to be working in Denver right now is you have to get a little bit more creative and look for a rent by the room approach, a large single family dwelling. You have to use the assumable mortgage. So the folks who are successful in house hacking today, I think, are because of the buyer's market dynamic in certain types of properties here in Denver, at least in certain other markets where I've talked to folks. That assumable mortgage means they have to bring more cash, which means, that can be $50,000 to $75,000 in many cases, if not a little more. But that there are ways to make it work and to drive it forward. But I would say that right now, in many cases, the duplex, triplex, quadplex in some cities, I don't think. Could you repeat it today, Bryce, at current prices with a similar property?
If I was coaching somebody to do it, what I would say is become location agnostic. I would say look for a Midwestern city that has reasonable demand. It doesn't have to have insane population growth, but look for something that has stock in places that are, let's say, in the path of progress in Midwestern cities. Your best shot at doing it is probably going to be there. There's multifamily inventory in a lot of Midwestern cities. You can get a decent price to rent ratio. And if it's a city that has jobs, you can count on a decent amount of demand, buttressing your investment and giving you decent cash flow. But if you had to do it in Denver, that might be a different story.
Awesome. Just call out that if you're going to be house hacking or making an all-in real estate bet, because the house hack is typically the biggest investment of someone's life by far up into that point on it, you should probably be able to speak about your metro, your MSA with the same quality that Bryce just did very casually there without even having to ask him about it. That shows you know what you're talking about, and that's probably a level of comfort you should build before making a decision like that. Bryce, where do you live today?
I still live in Bethlehem. The shortcut is this. We figured out how to burr pretty capably after that triplex. The next deal I did was, you guys have talked about a perfect burr. This was, I don't know what you would call it, an asymptotic burr, whatever's beyond perfect. The deal after that triplex deal, well, one, we bought a single family home because I promised my wife that we would. We lived in that small single family home. It was the cheapest house my wife would tolerate so that I didn't kill cash flow. We were making $3,000 a month off of these 5 adjacent units. That was the cash flow coming in. And I was still a teacher. And I thought, you know what, this is a fine time to just kind of like roll it in and, pack it in. I can make more money as a teacher than most teachers make because we're not paying anything for our house and we're getting like $1,500 a month in cash. So I thought about just circling the wagons there and not continuing to go. But I was still on that agent's automatic email list. And I now understood how to do ARV calculations and how to leverage debt. So it snowballed into us buying stuff under an LLC. That moved us from, let's say, 2012, 2015. I finally got to the point budget-wise. We had 15 or 16 total units across 5 buildings, all of them 2 to 4 unit multifamilies. And we were cash flowing enough that I was like, I don't think I need this job anymore. Not for 45 hours a week. Not when I'm doing my taxes and I can see that I'm paying way more on my income I'm getting from my W-2 job than the taxes I'm paying in my investment income from owning rentals. To me, that was the clincher where I was like, I just need to get a few more properties before I can spend like 10 hours a week or 15 hours a week making more money than I was making at a 45-hour per week job. So 2015, I retired from my job. We were making probably $8,500 a month in free cash flow off of our rentals. We were living in a 3-bedroom Cape Cod. We had my 4th daughter there. It was pretty hunky-dory. And then I just decided, you know what, we need to keep ramping this up. So I'll give you today's destination. So I retired from my teaching job in 2015. 2022, I hired a property manager. All of our units are in Bethlehem. I have 3 units in sort of the suburban township area that are condo townhomes. And then I have 34 units that are in the downtown part of Bethlehem. Bethlehem is kind of like a hipster place where 28-year-olds want to live and walk to restaurants and shopping and everything. And when we were buying, we made sure that we bought places that were going to be attractive and in a close range of sort of like the main restaurant and entertainment strip in downtown Bethlehem. And what my life looks like now, just to give you, maybe this provides hope. I don't know, maybe this is that pie in the sky, but at this point, my property manager handles most of the day-to-day. I still do Zillow ads for vacant units. I've renovated they're all historic 130-year-old buildings. I have lots of stories that would make your blood, run cold, but we've renovated them all really nicely to the point where the units are like exposed brick and hardwood floors and open concept. So they're cool, they're hip, they're all 1 and 2 bedroom units. So I get mostly roommates or young singles who are renting from me. Like I said, I do Zillow ads, I do tenant selection, and then I hand off my tenants to the property manager, and I'm kind of out of the picture for 12 months until that tenant is going to either renew or maybe move on. And so is that okay? Is that early retirement? I don't know. I think early retirement is a dial more than it is a switch. For me, I'm fine doing being involved every 12 months and then being able to kind of take off and go on vacation whenever I want in the interim.
Aside from the work, what does your Tuesday look like? How do you and your family spend your time when you're not doing this infrequent activity of marketing for new tenants?
I haven't bought much in the last 2 years. Cash flows at this point are at about $27,000 to $28,000 a month in free cash flow. Our budget is far less than that. We've gotten less careful about what we're spending because on the come up, we were spending like a teacher and a nonprofit worker. So we're well within our budget. I work out. I coach my daughter's lacrosse team. I volunteer at our church in the youth group, and sometimes on the worship team, I play guitar. I don't know if people go this direction in the podcast or not, but I will say this. The last 2 years, my wife and I and my kids, we have needed a lot of family time. My wife and I, we're pretty open about the fact that I think every marriage needs marriage counseling at some point. We realized 2 years ago that we probably needed to start investing in our marriage. We needed to spend time together. We needed to sort of detox some of the anxiety we had produced from going full bore for like a decade. And we just needed to be a family together. In some ways, I'm the poster child for the value of passive income, because if either of us had had W-2 jobs over the last 2 years, we would not have been able to dig in and do the counseling, the trips together, just the two of us, also trips together as a family that have really helped to, or served to help us grow. I think a lot of people get marriage issues and they end up kicking them down the road 10, 20 years. They don't deal with it because life just takes over and they don't have the space or the emotional bandwidth to handle it. And so the last 2 years for us have looked like a lot of that really important work. I don't want to be a super successful real estate investor and be divorced. I would rather be married and have the portfolio fall apart if that's what's going to happen. So far, we've been able to grow both. That's a lot of what I've been focusing on. And I'll say this too, that's the reason why if you're listening to this, you should work towards early retirement, or at least let's call it financial independence, where you're not as reliant upon a tyrannical boss or a demanding work schedule, and you can begin to invest in relationships, which are really the substance of life. So that's been the last 2 years for me. And I don't know, like I said, I feel like I waste more time now than I did, but I move bigger pieces than I used to move. And so I don't need to move things as often.
Well, Bryce, thank you so much for coming on BiggerPockets Money today and sharing your story. Really appreciate it and hope it inspires some other folks to take action.
I really do too. I've coached people in the past. I had a coaching cohort this spring. I usually do smaller cohorts, and we talk about some of this stuff too. How do we integrate a good financial strategy with like the pace of life and making sure that we're continuing to value the stuff that's important?
Well, thank you so much, and we'll hope to see you soon.
Yes, thank you, Bryce. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks so much, guys.
All right, Scott, that was Bryce. And that was a very interesting story. I love how he didn't have the more traditional fire adherent salary of six figures. And he instead was working. I mean, he and his wife together weren't making six figures. I think that's a really important piece to note. Yes, they were investing in a different time period, but they were investing. There are a lot of people who were in his same scenario who said, well, I guess we only make $80,000 a year combined, so there's no way that we can invest. And he said, you know what? We are going to do this. We are going to make some sacrifices, and we are going to pull ourselves out of this. I mean, I've said it before, teachers are criminally low paid. They should be paid a lot more. And it takes a special person to be a teacher. So I would rather have teachers have opportunities like this. I would rather have them have money first. But he was able to say, this isn't where I want to stay. I want to elevate my family and our lifestyle. So I am going to do things. What is that quote? Do what nobody else is doing now so you can live like no one else later.
And again, this goes back to the unfair advantage that really, the folk, our listeners who are starting out this journey in their late teens or 20 or early 20s have, right? Because that sacrifice is not that painful, or at least it was not for me when I was 23, 24, 25, right? It's just not to live in the basement of a duplex. I'm still having fun. I'm still doing all the things I want to do. It would be a sacrifice. It would be a major sacrifice to do that with our kiddo at this point and another one on the way. And that's exactly what happened here with Bryce and his wife. And it's so critical to be aligned on, yes, there's a better future coming for our living situation, because we're in this and we're doing all of this for that better future that enables us to live life on our terms with the passive cash flow, with the ability to withdraw from and live off of a portfolio of saved capital. And I think that's got to be part of the plan there. But if it is, then this is a path to getting there for someone with a lower income or in a teacher situation. You can't repeat exactly Bryce's approach, for example, in Denver with a triplex right now in most conditions. But there are almost certainly going to be opportunities out there that would be accessible to many people in a similar situation within a year if they're willing to make material sacrifices to their standard of living on there. And that has every opportunity to yield a better future on there if you can tolerate that in the meantime, because those days sound like we're completely full for them. You heard about it. Waking up early, going to school, teaching a full day, teaching cross country, putting the kiddos to bed, swinging a hammer upstairs to convert the unit. That's what it takes, I think, to really flip to the other side from a cash flow perspective and really get the snowball turning within a 3 to 5 year time period, if there's not that opportunity on the income front.
And, Scott, I was listening to him tell his story. I'm like, yep, that's what Carl and I did too. We would work our full-time jobs. Then we would come home and work our full-time at-home jobs on the house. And then we would go to sleep, get up and do it all over again. I think we were getting slightly more sleep than Bryce, but not that much.
I did the same thing in my early 20s, and Virginia house hacked with me when we first started dating back in like 2016, 2017. And we moved back into one of our duplexes after a brief renting stint where we were just renters in 2023 and lived there for a year in one of the house hacks. So now we live in our nice house that's our forever home. And that was always the vision. And we were on the same page about that.
Being on the same page is really important. I can't tell you how many times I have found the best house ever. And Carl's like, no. There's one house in our town that I was like, I want to buy this house and rehab it so badly. And Carl's like, there is no way we are buying this house. It was like a 5,000 square foot house. It would have been amazing at the end, but it would have been a really, really difficult remodel because everything needed to be flipped. Having your partner on the same page is so important. I absolutely agree.
Awesome. Well, should we get out of here?
That wraps up this episode of the BiggerPockets Money Podcast. He is Scott Trench. I am Mindy Jensen saying, take a break, rattlesnake.